Council, time is yours. Councilmember Smith.
Thank you, Mayor. Yeah, it was, well, I guess it's been about 4 weeks since we last met, so there's been quite a few things going on. I did attend the school safety forum that the city, I thought, supported very, very nicely. And I thought a lot of good questions were asked and a lot of good answers were given, and I think a little bit of a strategic plan. But I wanted to thank the Chief Stahl and Chief Leffler and you, the mayor, because I thought you guys did a great job representing the city, and really, I think you gave it a feeling of the fact that we have a handle on some things, you know, and we're here to support, and I thought it went very well, and I just really appreciate your support and your comments and being there. One thing I learned, and that Chief Stahl has helped me out with, and I wanted to just say publicly, a little bit about the police app, which I found really interesting, and I've shared it on Facebook and really want to get a lot of people engaged with that, because my understanding from the chief is that it would help with real-time data sharing in emergencies. And so I'm trying to encourage the public to look at that police app and download it and have it available in those times of emergencies. I thought that was really valuable information, so thanks, Chief. I also celebrated with about 250 people at the Fitness Challenge celebration, where our citizens lost over, correct me if I'm wrong, you two, I think it was over 1,400 pounds. So that was really fun. It was a great celebration. And I made the comment there that I thought this is something that I feel like all cities should look at in regards to having a healthy community and encouraging their people to eat healthy. It's not even really about losing weight, but to eat healthy. And you listen to all the benefits that occurred to many of the people there, and you're like, wow, this is really impressive. So I shared it with the Arizona League of Cities and Towns, and I hope that they invite Matt down to actually talk about it and share it with other cities. And I just thought it was a huge success, and it was just, you know, wildly exciting to see these people so excited about what they've done and the successes they've had. Trip, like many of my colleagues here, and I loved the discussion, the networking regarding key topics such as the federal infrastructure bill, which is going to be pretty exciting, and based on, I know the mayor and Councilmember Manfredi talked with our representatives about in regarding snagging a little piece. Hopefully we'll be able to snag a piece of that. I learned some interesting things about the homework gap, which, you know, we as the city don't really engage a whole lot in education, but I found it interesting that learning more about the homework gap and what some of the fixes can be regarding the homework gap. So information to share with our community. And then transportation, one interesting piece that I just wanted to share tonight regarding transportation, and David's not here, but there was a discussion on a city looking at using Uber as an alternative to city-operated transportation, and that they could actually service more people at a lower cost using Uber. And I thought, interesting. Not that we're going to make a big change at this point, but just something interesting. And this is why we go to these things, is really to learn more about what other cities are doing and come back with some potential strategies and ideas. So it's been an eventful 4 weeks, and I'm happy to share. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Smith. Anyone else? Yes, Vice Mayor.
Thanks, Mayor. Again, another busy month. On the March 2nd, I attended the Maricopa Marketplace that was hosted by MCE. Seems that every time they have one of those, it grows. On the 7th, and Lynette, my apologies to you, I'm going to mess this up, but I participated in the youth symposium that was held out at Desert Winds Middle School. Lynette Caroselli was kind of the coordinator of that. I got to talk to a couple hundred 6th graders, 7th graders about what serving your city is all about. Councilmember Wade was with me. We had some interesting questions, interesting dialogue. I thank you for that opportunity. On the 10th, I attended the Maricopa Police Department VIN etching exercise over in Bash's parking lot. And then on the 15th, I was here for the City Complex Design Charrette that was hosted by our consultant. And I just want to thank all the public that came out to that, and also the two consultants that facilitated that we had some really good ideas, some really good visioning, some dot polling about what the city center complex looks like when it gets built out, what kind of things we can do here with it, what don't we want to see, what would work well. So very good planning session. Thanks to the planning department for putting that together. That's it for me.
Thank you very much. Vice Mayor, Councilmember Brown.
Yes, Mayor, I had occasion also, along with several other colleagues, to attend the National League of Cities. And this year, there was a number of very excellent plenary sessions, far and above what they normally have. The kickoff date before the general session began was the Diversity Awards breakfast, where the cities and towns that had excelled in diversity were honored, which was a great experience. Also attended the taxation conference, where they discussed the significance of what that tax cut will look like in terms of the next several years, but warning that those youngsters who are to be born and younger than that, who not having been thought of, will be facing some substantial debt in the next 20 years. So that's a situation that unfortunately will be facing those citizens who were alive at that time. Really important in conference attended was the question of the census. Those of you here probably recognize we will be having a census in 2020, and as apt to happen, we normally never capture all the citizens because of a host of reasons. This year, in fact, this week, the Secretary of Commerce should be submitting to the White House those questions that will be on the census questionnaire and how many questions. There's always been a substantial fallout from non-English speaking citizens, low-income citizens, hard-to-reach citizens, and surprisingly, children just born from 0 to 5 are normally not counted, surprisingly. So that's a major effort will be to capture electronically all the votes, and then secondly, by paper. There will be really a concerted effort to capture all the citizens living in the United States, because it's very important that we capture, obviously, the state benefits financially, and the cities and towns benefit financially. There's $4 trillion that's divvied up every 10 years as a result of the census among the states. So it's very important that we have a committee formed, as we had 10 years ago, 5 years ago actually, we had that, and 10 years ago also, and then we reach out to the religious affiliations, and we reach out to the schools to make sure those people who do not have their own computers can capture that information at the schools and also at the libraries. So I'm sure that committee will be formed sometime next several months, going into 2019, when the real launch will begin. Extremely important. That's it.
Thank you, Councilmember Brown. Appreciate it. Councilmember Wade.
Thank you, Mayor. Thank you for mentioning the safety program over at the school district. I attended that as well, and I agree that the chief and both chiefs made it very clear that they have a handle on at least what should be done in the event something does happen. They're not in the dark. They're not paying attention to what needs to be done. There was one comment that was made from a young student that was in support of having firearms, teachers having firearms in the classroom, and I thought it was very bold of that student to come forth and say that, because it kind of goes against the wisdom of the idea of the other students. So I thought that folks felt empowered to be able to speak. And one of the things too that I thought was very important is that the students wanted to be listened to. And I think that that's going on across the country, is the students want to be listened to, and they have some things to talk about. So I thought it was very good. The other thing is, as we know, the MUSD is going through a superintendent search for a new superintendent. And then on Monday the 26th at 7 o'clock at the MUSD, there will be an opportunity for the community to meet the 3 finalists that have been selected and for them to present. It's going to be about an hour, hour and a half session, so I would suggest getting there early, as it was with the safety forum. It'll probably get pretty crowded once people know what's going to take place. So I recommend that happen. I had been kind of attending some of the sessions, or at least in the room. I didn't get a chance to see the finalists the last meeting that they held, but they have gone through their search as we're going through our search for city manager, and have a professional company doing it and doing a real good job of getting that done. The last thing I wanted to talk about, or wanted to mention, was an event that I attended with the NAACP, the Pinal County NAACP, Ms. Connie Jackson. She does a talk, and it's called Let's Have That Talk. And previously, in the beginning, when she first started having these sessions, these forums, it was pretty well attended. I was kind of disappointed that it wasn't as well attended here recently, and I'm hopeful that people will understand there's an opportunity to have some dialogue, to talk about things that they're concerned about, to share opinions and ideas to try to help. One of the things that I'm very proud of is the African-American, the governor's African-American council. When they came to Maricopa, they spoke very highly of Maricopa, and it was because of the attendance that we had at that particular forum that they spoke so highly of us, that we do have a community that is engaged and participating with each other. So I would hope that that would continue, and if there's issues out there, we can continue that conversation.
Thank you, Councilman. Anyone else this time? Councilman Manfredi.
This is a long one. There was a lot going on, and we missed a meeting in between there. But like our other council members here, and I was able to attend the National League of Cities in Washington, which was really great. What I took away from it is the smart tech, which was mentioned by Nancy, Council Member Smith, just a minute ago, was the smart technology. And I spent a lot of time in a couple of things regarding it, and how smaller cities are using smart tech because of the cost savings and the ability for us to really streamline the costs and expand the service. So have more for less, which is pretty nice. And using smart tech allows us to do that. I sat in on some tax information and some sessions on it, and marijuana policy and what we're going to expect over the next 5, 10, 15, 20 years in regard to that, and how eventually it's probably going to be legalized throughout the country. And one of the best sessions, I think, was a session about the opioid crisis that the country is facing, and understanding, what can be done, what can't be done, how we can help. And all that happened after a couple days of visiting with the Army Corps of Engineers about our Lower Santa Cruz flood issues, meeting with Department of Transportation about the I-11 and 347 and how we can expect some federal help on both of those. We met with every congressional office except for one because it was kind of empty. Frank's is not there anymore. And then we met with our Senate staff, which was great. So it was pretty good to be able to speak with them. So we came away from a week-long trip to Washington with so much information, and I think we accomplished a lot. I think the Department of Transportation meeting that we had with Christian Price and myself and Bob Holmes, as well as Dale, was probably the best of the entire trip, and worked the entire trip in itself, because we came away from that with understanding on the I-11 and of course the 347, and understanding that it's not just an extra lane that we need there, we need a whole lot more overpasses and flyovers and all of that, and how we can utilize the relationships we have to make all that happen. One of the other important things that came away from in Washington was understanding the homework gap, and it was a conversation that Nancy actually brought up, I believe, earlier, or I think it was on social media you brought it up, and the homework gap, and understanding that just because, your kids might have a computer at home and might have internet at home, there's so many kids that just don't have high-speed internet, and schools are giving homework that require it. You know, my daughters come to me and they say, I need a laptop for homework, and I buy a laptop and give it to them for homework. They tell me they need stuff for school, and I just go out and I buy it and give it to them for school, but there's so many people that can't afford that. So we have to find ways that we can help those kids. If it's, like Nancy mentions, is a map of where they can actually go and do homework. It's a lot that's involved. But I think as a community, Maricopa is pretty much able to do almost anything. So I think it's something we'll be able to help with, and especially utilizing our city hall as well as our library. But there's probably a ton more stuff to talk about. But the most important thing that happened in the last 3 weeks is we opened up a new store here in Maricopa. And you would think it was Black Friday out there.
Yeah.
There was lines from Goodwill all the way through by Fry's, and it was for a $5 coupon that they mailed everybody anyway. So everybody got a $5 coupon this week in the mail anyway. But the funniest part was there was 2 young gentlemen who sat there the entire night and held a space for 3 other kids that were coming at 6:30 in the morning. They sat in a tent, they slept there, they were there the entire night. They were the only ones, but it's pretty cool. But it just shows the thirst that the people of Maricopa have for new. And I can imagine what's going to happen when the Dollar Tree opens, and usually they give away good stuff then, and when Ross opens, and then Dunkin' Donuts.
Oh, goody.
Yeah, Dunkin' Donuts and Burger King and new gas
stop it.
pumps, and yes, it's all coming. Wait, there's another nail salon, so that's fun too. But anyway, thank you.
Thank you very much, Councilmember. Anyone else this time? Okay, seeing no one, we will go ahead and move on. That'll take us to item 3.2, and that'll take us to item 3.3. The mayor and city council shall hear a presentation on the current development process for residential subdivisions. Martin, take it away. Tell us what you're doing for us tonight.
Thank you. Good evening, Mayor and Council. Over the 3 years that I've been here, we've had quite a few conversations in this room about development process. What does it involve? We will sometimes hit on little pieces of it as we're doing presentations for some project, that's going on, or is about to go on. And we've had many questions about, okay, can we get a better understanding of the overall process? While all of you just took up 24 minutes of my presentation, we're going to have to kind of bolt through this. I know you were. And so, anyway, so we're going to try and get through one piece of that tonight, and we will come back later. We'd also like to get some feedback from you, even if it's after this meeting, to say, okay, this was good information. I want to see more of this, so that way we can kind of tailor it as we go. So tonight we're going to concentrate on the residential development process because it's basically the simplest. That said, we're going to show you what we started with in this process. It took about a year to get all of these finished, but we put, I say we, Rudy did most of the work. So Rudy put together these flow charts, and we printed them out, and we scribbled on them, and so there's 4 of these, I think, 4 or 5 of these that we started with, and we had meetings where we have everybody who's involved in the process come in and sit down and kind of scribble these out and say, okay, here's things that we see that could be changed or added or removed, or it really gave us a snapshot of, okay, there are areas where we have overlap, there are areas where we're doubling efforts, and the overall goal being, let's see how we can make this simpler, more understandable, streamlined as much as we can. Now, before Rudy gets into the presentation of what we have tonight, I just want to let you know that complicated development processes are the norm across not just the valley, but across the country. Some communities have figured out ways to find some shortcuts. Some of them have not, but even the ones with shortcuts are still pretty complicated. So where we're looking at the residential, when we get to the commercial one, that's going to be even more complicated. So like I said, as a rule, the process is complicated. We've tried to include as much information in the updated flow chart as possible. So you're going to see who does what documents are required. I don't know, do we have the fees on there? We do not have the fees on there, but they will be on there to the documents that we're going to be giving out to the development community. The idea being, hopefully, we're trying to give all the information we can right at the first meeting. This is everything you need. And up to date, we've not had a good one place that has all that information. You have to kind of piece it together from different documents. And so, again, the idea being streamline, communicate, get this information to them up front so we can get some of those things out. And we, as planning staff and public works and fire and police and everybody, and ED, everybody who's involved in this process, we can miss things sometimes when we just go off the cuff. So this is something that is going to really, I think, help us provide better customer service. And it's going to allow us to see what are other areas where we can streamline, where we can take overlap and remove it, and shorten the process. We've already put into place some of the things that we saw where we said, okay, there's definitely overlap there. We've already put that into everyday policy. This is, okay, we're already making that change. Or there's a document that we already have in the system. Since it's no longer paper, we can say, okay, we don't need you to submit that again as long as there's been no changes. We'll just take it from this place and move it to here within SmartGov, and we have it on record. It's already been stamped. It's done. We don't have to go back and review that again. So again, that shortens time. So there's just a couple of examples that I can think of. Otherwise, I'm going to not take up any more of Rudy's time and let him explain it. Again, we welcome questions throughout the process here because it does get complicated very fast. And I think Rudy's going to try not to talk over your heads as far as jargon and all that stuff. So if there's something you don't understand, stop him, or I'll stop him. Thank you.
Thank you, Martin.
Thank you, Martin. Mayor, council members, and one thing no, not right now. Thank you. As Martin was speaking, what reminded me of was that since myself and Kaz has been here, 10 plus years, Kaz a little bit longer than I have, a lot what's happened over the past, what I've seen 10 years, is institutional knowledge, the way it's always been done. We have seen great staff come in and help us achieve a better process, and we are working towards finding the old way that's always been done, and now we can look at better ways to do it better. And I think this has helped us better understand what we can do to expedite and find areas that overlap and consolidate as best. So if anything, thank you, Martin, for letting us go through this process to understand where we can at least consolidate as best. And now we've documented our process, and that can be continued to stay with the city and not stay with staff itself. With that, I'll go ahead and start. Clicker, sorry. So as Martin kind of precursed the presentation, is to evaluate the existing process. And we are going to be doing this for the commercial process and also incorporate this into each type of application process there is. What we're doing is a cradle-to-grave development process for residential and commercial. So anything that involves residential, commercial, from engineering to fire to building safety to planning, it's all incorporated into these two types of presentations. Tonight's presentation number one. As mentioned, find areas of consolidation, and lastly, we want to educate. We want to educate leadership. We want to educate our commissioners, our committees, educate the public. Use this as a format to educate the public in the simplest form fashion. With that, Abel, do you mind going ahead and switching over to the web browser? So bear with us. This is a different type of presentation format. We are going through, I think we've described it almost as an experience. There you go. So what you see here in this entire color-coded type of bar chart or bar flow chart is the cradle to grave of the residential subdivision process. Each color-coded bar represents an application process from cradle to grave. We have the pre-application, the plan of development, another pre-application, a preliminary subdivision plat, final plat, building permits, construction permits, administrative design review for residential homes, and then lastly is our building safety master standard plans, and then lastly is a CFO for that house. So it encompasses from zoning entitlement all the way through engineering, building safety, and finally getting a plot, which Roberts has mentioned is getting a 1 day, within 20 minutes getting a plot plan approved. let's start off with the pre-application. So, as we always mention, pre-applications are a way for staff, and like Martin said, correct me or stop me if you want me to elaborate on anything here. A pre-application is very common for cities nationwide. They're intended to provide preliminary information on a specific request from one developer or any applicant comes to the city. We look at our submittal requirements, simply a narrative of what the proposed project is, and a simple sketch drawing. We're not asking for applicants to present to us architectural design or hire an architect this time, just an idea. This type of application for staff, we include planning department, engineering, building safety, community services, fire, police, and it's not listed here, but other committee chairs as well. So our age-friendly committee, our planning and zoning commission committee chairs, and any chairs of the city itself. I like to call the review process more of a roundtable meeting, to where we do, as the pre-application submitted, we then go to an internal meeting. We sit down, review that narrative, review that sketch plan. We as a team, as a city, we try to make sure that we're on the same page, we're looking at the same requests, and we make sure that any comments that we're mentioning are not contradicting each other as a department or as a city itself. So fire has a comment about the building setback has to be this, but the zoning requires the building to be forward facing. That's where we can hash out those internal review meetings. So once we have our internal comments established through our process, well, then the next step after that was to meet with the applicant. Meeting with the applicant is where we then provide almost what we call like a report, analysis report of these are the major hurdles and what next steps are required for that specific request. First, and this is just thinking about for a subdivision. So this report gives them guidance on what the next steps after this process will be, the formal steps, and also provides information about, we try to provide development fee information, our review times, and it gives the applicant an opportunity to ask us questions about what the current process is or to clarify anything that there is. I want to mention, I was thinking of something I need to mention. I can't remember. If anything, this pre-application, we'd like to call it within 2 to 3 weeks. Our current staffing level and amount of work that we have, we used to do it 2 weeks back in the day. Now it's definitely gone up to 3 weeks. But that's the very first process, the pre-application. Oh, and it's not all-inclusive. So what we try to achieve here is the major hurdles, the major items that they should be aware of. We kind of tell the applicants their responsibility to look at all of our policy codes, our policy guides and code requirements. We're not going to touch on everything, but they know where our policy documents are at so they can review it. So the onus is on the development to get that information. We're there here to provide them guidance on major hurdles and what the process is. After the pre-application, we then go to the planning and development. For a residential subdivision process, it's very typical for a large-scale subdivision that's of 640 acres plus size, that they want to do some type of planning development process. And in a nutshell, a planning development, if you haven't heard it once or twice, PADs are a flexibility tool for zoning planners to utilize to get creative developments on the city side, but at the same token, the developers get more freedom and flexibility away from the base zoning code that we have. And in other discussions later on, I know we're going to try to find a way where our zoning code, instead of going away from the zoning code, PADs can be maybe not utilized, but PADs are more of an incentive tool, the way I see it. As a PAD is submitted, it gets routed for review, and if you guys don't mind, I'd like to go item by item just to make sure you guys are educated on this. So we see the pre-application determination, a narrative. As part of PAD is a rezone, so they have to go through a citizen outreach documents. We have to notify the public. We give them a template what that looks like in the pre-application. We get preliminary water report, preliminary sewer report, drainage report, a traffic report. So we start to look at traffic at this point, but it's still preliminary. We're not finalizing a traffic impact of where access points should be at. If anything, we're looking at how circulation will be provided and how circulation will be going outwards. We still don't like to finalize anything at this level, it's still preliminary. Phasing plan's big these days after the post-recession. A lot of developers like to phase in stuff. So that's definitely something that we're trying to see that makes sense for the city, that phasing is sustainable on its own, not dependent on other phases to work together. alter surveys, phase 1 reports, environmental reports to understand what, if there's any environmental contamination to the site, we need to see that the site's clear of any contaminated. If it is known to be contaminated, then we ask for what recommended steps in next phase 2 to how to remediate that issue on the property. Title report and the PAD booklet. Typically, if you've ever seen a PAD booklet, it discusses basically, it's creating its own zoning standards for that specific development. Case in point, a good example is our Santa Rosa development where Central Arizona College is at. They actually have their own, zoning development document that's separate from the zoning code itself. Router for review, we go to internal TAC review meeting.
Hold on, Rudy.
Oh, go ahead.
Councilman Reed.
I'm sorry, Rich. I have one quick question here on the, in the Alta survey and the title reports, it's indicated here 90 days and 60 days. How does that relate to the completeness review time? What does that mean, that it be at 90 days or 60 days?
Councilmember Wade, Mayor, if anything, what it is the requirement is that the title report cannot be older than 60 days, and I apologize, it doesn't, the Alta survey also cannot be older than 90 days. To my understanding from engineer's perspective, the intent is to see the most relevant data on site there today. We're not, at this point, we're asking for the data submittal. Some circumstances, if we have numerous reviews, maybe over a 3-month or 9-month span, we could ask for an updated Alta survey, an updated title report, just to verify that those are continue to be the same owners. But that's generally, it's a standard throughout the nation. I think if anything, what we're going to try to codify, update this, is matching them together, 90 days for both documents, and not have this 60 days for title report, 90 days for Alta survey.
I think I understand. I got it. Thank you.
Okay.
Appreciate it.
Rudy, a question for you.
Yes.
You just mentioned how CAC has its own zoning document, and I find that interesting. When we were recently taking the tour of, forgive me, what was the? Verado. And that was something they mentioned about, I don't know that they necessarily mentioned that it was separate, but they talked about how their zoning code was influenced by the development itself, and because of its prominence and the things they were trying to accomplish. And so they actually sat down and worked with the city of Buckeye to help make that, something that was different than what they were used to doing. Can you talk a little bit about, I know you're presenting the PAD here, but can you talk a little bit about how that may or may not come into something that we would do someday here with a potential project that was of the right size or the right, magnificence that it warranted something like that? Because clearly you're not going to do it for everything.
Right.
But at the same time, how do you create some universality to saying that you're going to do it for this and not for something else? So how do you deal with that?
If I understand the question, I think, if anything, a good example, Mayor and council members, is the Our Lady Grace project. If you guys recall what they've done out there, and I'll be happy to more educate you offline, but with the Our Lady Grace site, that went through a planning development, a PAD, and that's a little bit different because if you ever look at their document, which again I'll be happy to share with you, is they went ahead and developed their own creative design standards that at the time, back in 2009 when we did this, our Pinell County zoning code was designed for county-type developments, more rural-type city. So the PAD, again, we see as planners, it's a toolkit to utilize to get creative developments from the private side, but at the same token, from the city gets that and the developer gets, what a flexibility in nature. What we've used that document from the Our Lady Grace project what's come out of that is ideas to incorporate within our 2014 zoning code. So in the 2014 zoning code, we took somewhat of we saw the process in Our Lady Grace project and the development standards that was created that we worked very diligently with the applicant to make sure it made sense with fire, with engineering, with the public safety departments. And we saw that this type of development standard could be utilized for other areas of the city. Right. So case in point, we developed the mixed-use heritage, which is the Heritage District overlay, we sprinkled in a couple ideas from the Our Lady Grace project where that was almost like a pilot idea, and now we see it somewhat working. Actually, there's no buildings yet, but we understand the concept, and we've incorporated that concept. We codified it as a standard, but only for specific areas of the city that it makes sense at this point. I'm not sure if that helped.
We want to see diversity of business areas and, that mixture of urban and rural as well as of maybe, I don't want to call it hyper-urbanization, but like you talk about in reference to the Our Lady of Grace project, when you were talking about potentially building buildings that have, businesses on the bottom for walkability, but then homes on the top, something like you see back east. And so I think that that's very much what we'd like to see. It's just a matter of, again, there's a balance here between, we can have that all day long, but the builder has to want to come and design it and build it. But at the same time, how does it reference where others can just come in and say, we want to utilize this as well?
I see what you're saying. Yeah, and I think that goes back to our codified standards. It goes back to, and I don't want to dive too much into this, but as I mentioned in the previous presentation, our subregs is where our planning development standards lives, and our subregs of 06, I kind of call it pre-recession. It was a time that we didn't expect the recession to happen, but it did, and those design standards for 2006 are no longer, and with the strategic plan and Plan Maricopa, we have an idea where we're going as a city. So I think it's that time for as a city to now look at what the criteria is for a PAD. How can we take the model from Verado or from Our Lady of Grace and where it makes fit of what we need to see. Again, it goes more to a creative type of design that makes sense of what a true PAD is. Not lot sizes variation. A true PAD is a mixture of land uses. So
Perfect. Thank you.
okay. The internal, we call internal TAC, Technical Advisory Committee. Similar to the pre-application, we have a round table of reviewers. In this, we kind of expand the review committee to utilities, other agencies, other government agencies, like such as the Achin Gila River. The utilities are involved at this point. Because we don't control utilities in Maricopa, it's good that we keep them aware of projects early in the design stages. They have their own process, but we have good communication where they could come to our meetings, sit about and talk about the development process and see any type of conflicts that they may have with our standards. After that internal TAC meeting, we then, again, meet with the applicant, and that's where there's two parts to this. Whether the request for the PAD meets our code requirements, where we could proceed to P&Z Commission for recommendation, or if we kind of say it's deficient. We kind of go back to the drawing board, address these comments, and it goes back to basically the start of where it started with resubmittal. One thing that we're trying to hone on is more of like how many days does a resubmittal last. With seeing the worst of the worst, we have had applications be in hiatus for almost 2 years and 3 years. And unfortunately, there's no code to back us up that, hey, this needs to be back to the drawing board. A lot has changed in the past 2 years, flooding, Lower Santa Cruz Wash, someone mentioned. But those are things we're working through things out. If the request is then determined to go to P&Z gives a recommendation. Prior to that step, PAD is a zoning document. As I mentioned, the submittal, we have to notify the neighbors residing within, we call it 300 feet radius, and they have to be aware of the zone change. By state statute, any land use change needs to be notified by 3 forms of documents: by letter, public notice in the newspaper, and a site posting on the property. Site posting, public notice, and a neighborhood notification letter. We go above and beyond by having neighborhood meetings to make sure that we've addressed any concerns from the public at that point. And then we take that type of information, the applicant does, takes a report to the P&Z Commission. The P&Z Commission reviews that report as part of the recommendation. After that recommendation, they provide that to whether deny or approval to this body, City Council. So that's PAD. Okay, thank you. This is a good example of what a PAD looks like. Again, it's very, if you haven't seen it yet, but it's very, I call it bubble map diagram. It's trying to understand the land use. I will say it's almost like 20% design level where we're just understanding the site function of it. We don't get into like 80% plans of it until later on in the next stage. So sometimes when a PAD is done, it could wait. We could wait for 2 years before they're ready to pull the trigger for the next step. And we do a pre-application again because we just want to retouch or recap what has happened in the previous stage of the PAD. Maybe there's some special conditions that are placed as part of that process that maybe there's some new staff or maybe something we have to refresh our memory. So depending on the situation, if they're going back-to-back PAD then the pre-plat, we probably will skip this step. But if it's been in hiatus for a year or 2 years, it makes common sense, logical sense for city staff to do just a refresher on what the previous entitlements of that PAD was. After the pre-application, we again go into the preliminary plat. And this is where, Martin, do you mind just passing that out? I apologize. I may have skipped over. I apologize. The wording here, the text is kind of small. But this is a blown-up version, a little bit more readable version that you could read, the preliminary plat. So this gets into what I call more of a 50% design submittal. We see a lot of 50% more technical information at this stage. The preliminary plat is submitted. It's routed for review, and I should have kept a copy. But here we see a preliminary plat design title report. Again, we're seeing an alter survey. We are seeing draft CCNRs, conditions, covenants, and restrictions at this point, to just understand what regulations are going to be proposed to be imposed. We start to see a drainage report, traffic report. Again, we're seeing a more updated traffic report that's going to be somewhat locked down at this stage level. Phase 1, I think that's a typo. I think if the phase 1 was done in the PAD, that's typically we want to see it. If nothing's changed from the site, we can still take the phase 1 from the PAD level. Here we start to see a landscape plan at this point. Again, it's preliminary landscape over 50%. And then I mentioned here, I did mention planning fees. So the planning fees are included in that submittal. As part of the next step, our internal review, it's very similar to the PAD. The TAC committee is very similar, where you have all those divisions and committee chairs and utilities. Very similar to the PAD, where once that's done, we go through a sit-down meeting with the applicant. If all those comments have been, or anything that's deficient, we'll go back to our original process. If everything's okay, then that's where we go back to, this actually goes to Planning and Zoning Commission for recommendation. So one thing I want to highlight here in between, if it's determined to be in compliance and the P&Z Commission reviewing recommendation, there's a neighborhood meeting as applicable. And our current code gives us the authority to call out a neighborhood meeting if need basis. We don't throw this out there. We don't utilize this wild card because the notion is that at this stage, the zoning's already set in place. The land use change has been done. Martin and I kind of call this more of a by right process. They have the right to proceed this platting process. We use this one, if you recall, Province, Parcel 3, that large green space that everyone thought it was green space, which came back to be a plan for future more lots. We, as a city staff, want to make sure that the public was aware that they went, so we had them go through a neighborhood process, and there was no major concerns from that. So that's a good example to kind of give you some relation to how that works out. After P&Z Commission, City Council action for approval of the preliminary plat. I do want to make mention on and this gives you an example of what, again, not very detail-oriented, but still 50% where we can start locking in access, how the parcels are being circulated, and where we could see some faults and maybe there could be some more interconnectivity, or where we start calculating open space. Open space is very critical to subdivisions, and making access to open space per our design standards is very critical as well. But like you can see here, it's still kind of bubble diagram, color-coded, not very highly detailed.
If you categorized the PAD portion as 20% detailed, what would you categorize this?
Kind of like 50%.
50?
Yeah. So notice on the very far left that time varies a max 2 years, and it's on your next page or the red portion of it. The pre-plat, there's a time frame. Our subdivision talks about building within a timely manner. And I know we dealt with this as a city of extending pre-plats longer than because of certain situations. But by code, it does talk about limiting them to no more than 2 years. We want these plats to be built within a timely manner, not sit on or sat on for the market to come back. The code does read very well that if they're ready to develop, they're ready to develop within a matter of 2 to 4 years or so, not to be held and bank it and when they're ready. That's something that, as part of subregs update, we are reviewing what is best practice out there, because the capping and limiting the number, how many times you could extend a pre-plat, and the staff concern is the environment can change over 10 years, 5 years, and we've seen it here in the city. But we are researching best practice post-recession and what makes sense, what other cities are doing, because we see the need, the developers need to be assisted, but at the same token, we need to protect the city as well. So just a little caveat for the subregs.
Well, Rudy, a question there. I mean, I guess you pseudo-answered my question, which is, post-recession, and what are you seeing out there? Because, again, nobody expects to see a depression in their lifetime. Nobody expects to see a great recession in their lifetime, especially one that revolves around a real estate boom and or bust. And so, with that comes a unique set of challenges, especially when that recession lasts 6, 7, 8 years. So while everybody knows that everybody was charging forward to build something, when it comes to a screeching halt and lasts in and out of a decade, how do you deal with that when it's changed hands? And so those rights ride with the land, but like you said, everything's changed. So
Yes.
there has to be a changing going with it, but there also has to be an honoring of past agreements to some extent, because that wasn't planned for by anybody.
Right. Mayor, council members, if anything, we are seeing cities accommodate to the post-recession type of time frame, but at the same token, to a certain extent as well. So it is a separate item, something that we are going to look into, what is best practice and what makes sense to meet halfway in the middle with the developers and the city itself. Hopefully, we can find the best recommendation on that. And
Well, I was just going to add that I think it's impossible to both predict that, and we accept that, but it's also impossible to accommodate that in your code. And so the way I've seen it in the past is we don't just give open-ended extensions to everything that's sitting on the books, but you might pass an ordinance should something like that come up. You might pass an open-ended, not open-ended, but an open ordinance to everything that is at this stage, or this stage, that you do get an extension, and then say it's 2 years, and then at the end of 2 years, staff would bring it back and say, okay, we've gone the 2 years, we've seen these changes, or we haven't seen any changes in the economy or whatever that's going on, then make a recommendation, say, okay, we should extend that again, but it should be revisited. And what we've been faced with as a city is things that are completely open-ended, and we have no way to close those gaps. Even if there's changes in our code, there's changes in the economy, there's changes in the land or the conditions, we have no way to close those gaps. And so this would at least allow us something where we could come back and say, every year, every 2 years, whatever this body decides at that time, that this is an appropriate amount of time to come back and say, okay, let's check this out again and see if we can go ahead and start closing that gap. So that's kind of what I anticipate seeing once we have that update. That's what I've seen as best practice.
Yeah, and I don't disagree with that. I want to make sure that that's understood, that I think that having those timeframes is important, because under normal circumstances, that's how it's going to ride. And I don't mean to hound on a bizarre episode that happened in our history that, will eventually happen again at some point, hopefully not in our lifetimes. But that being said, again, just trying to think outside the box a little bit. Again, I agree with you, Martin. You can't predict that, and I don't think that you even plan for it necessarily. But it is such a weird time, because I can imagine you standing at the podium here, bringing something back to us for decision, and it's right in the middle of that 2-year recession, and that land doesn't belong to anybody, because in the bank's hands somewhere at the bottom of a portfolio, and nobody cares that it exists at that moment. What a bizarre place to be in, And so, there have to be exceptions to those bizarre rules at those times, and I think that's kind of what I'm looking for is, there has to be that little catch in there for what if. We've lived it, but I hope we don't live it again.
And the biggest thing I think that what Martin kind of insinuated is we didn't have a criteria of what to do. We didn't have a process for the situation. So what we've done in the past is kind of, we did our best thing that we thought was best interest for the city. I think what we're learning now is that we're not going to predict the future. That's good. That's a good way to say it. But at the same token, we need to find a criteria of what makes sense to have those type of options available. If anything, having those options in code will help us as staff. I'll go through this fairly quickly with the rest of it. With this portion of the code, or this portion of the process, I want to make mention of the items highlighted in the red under the submittal requirements in that green font box area. Those are, this is the final plat process. So this is where we see Councilmember Smith kind of 100% plans. So this is where the process is that we're taking back what we saw in the pre-plat and we're finalizing everything with a little bit more technical information. You have surveyor notes, every curved line, any change in how that curve, we have actual radiuses and distances, and it's very detailed of what that looks like. We start to make sure that these lots are developable, the roadway widths are meets current standards, we're adding the bike lanes, the right amount of landscape is incorporated, the DG trail or the sidewalk built is, the way they're built are designed to our standards. It gets a lot more detail and a lot of improvement plans. So everything in red is what we call their improvement plans. We have grading, drainage, paving plans, water and sewer plans, street light plans. Something that we didn't do as a city prior to '06 was street lights. We kind of incorporate street lights plans. We have requirements for street lights in our neighborhood roads, our arterials and collectors. The notion of Maricopa as a dark sky community, that's just a county standard that they didn't require street lights every so distance along Rancho Dorado Parkway. They only put it as need be, as what made sense, logical sense. We actually have standards of spacing requirements for collector roads like Rancho Dorado Parkway, how many street lights are required for that road segment.
Rudy, what did you call that grouping of the red font?
The improvement plans.
Improvement.
Yeah,
plans.
the improvement plans those are your bread and butter of how that subdivision is going to be built. So note here is that as I move on to the next, where we get into, like we call it, and this is what that same plan you saw, a little more detail oriented. Again, we're seeing the landscaping, the lot details, the lot numbers, sequential orders. Everything's a little more detail oriented and 100% plan drawings ready for construction. As we get into the construction part of it, we call it a construction permit. So here, we take those same improvement plans, and this is where we're finding a way to consolidate our process. If the final plat's ready to be recorded and ready to be recorded with the county, those improvement plans are signed off by our city engineer, our zoning administrator as well, then our process with SmartGov, we don't need to see a copy of those approved improvement plans. We already have files of those approved stamps. So at this where we saw that the submittal requirements require them to resubmit the same plans that we just saw in the subdivision final plat. So here's where we saw some consolidation ways to say that there's no need to unless something's changed or modified, then we will ask for resubmittal, but we should have the approved plans. So this process makes it, the streamlines it a lot quicker. As the next part, after the construction permit has been done, we go into administrative design review, where again, the previous slide was they built it, they inspected it, it's accepted by the city, the streets have been now passed a resolution for city to be responsible for those streets, and here we get into administrative design review, where we're now looking at a builder presenting us design reviews of how that house and product's gonna look like. What's great about our 2014 code update is that we also incorporated single-family design regulation, single-family residential design guidelines. And these design guidelines, prior to the city, we didn't have much say on how houses should look like. A coin that Kazi and I use a lot, 360-degree architecture. All sides of the building should have some type of embellishment or architecture enhancements. What's been great over the past 4 years is that our single-family residential design guidelines, I would say generally 80% of it has been very taken into consideration by the builders. We called it guidelines just to give an incremental step that this is the direction we want to see for residential architecture for production builders. But at the same token, they're guidelines to be flexible in nature because, again, as Martin mentioned, we can't predict what type of design features we're going to see in the next 5, 10 years. These are type of working documents, but if anything with this, it has given us more onus on how designs of drawings of home builder production housing look like. And I think you can see the home price we see from Fulton Homes, from the new ones. If you notice, there's a drastic difference from now to what you see back in the day from '06 and the heydays of the 600 permits per month.
Do you feel that the developers and the builders feel a little more secure with that process?
They're receptive to it. I think a lot has bought into, they understand what we as a city want to see for architecture and production housing. I think there's room to maybe modify what makes sense, what maybe is too overreaching. But that's why I mentioned that these are guidelines. And so we have the flexibility as staff to, as long as we're meeting the intent here, we can be flexible in nature. A good product, KB introduced their detached garage, man cave type of concept. And I think that came out of that flexibility option of they could do this. And for them, to my understanding, it's been a great success of selling those detached garages over there in Homestead.
So you experience a little less pushback from them, if you will?
Originally we did, but it's all receptive. They know what, as long as they know what we need to see, what they want us to see, or yeah, they will submit it as need basis. So what their path is, let us know what you guys want from the city, and we will do it. But there's still room to maybe modify what makes. I think there's some areas in here that's too overreaching, and that's something we're going to work on as staff. Yeah.
Sorry,
Rudy,
Vice Mayor.
one quick question. We get a fair amount of public records requests from homeowners that may not have been here when the original house was built. Will we now have all these floor plans on file in SmartGov so we can have those homeowners that don't have a floor plan can access that through SmartGov, or how does that work?
Councilmember, Vice Mayor Chapados, council members, or Mayor. Honestly, we do have, Vanessa will quote me, there's state statutes of how long permits we can keep permits. I know there's and I don't know what the years is, but I know there's almost like a 5-year or 2-year of destruction of permits. So electronically, I know we could keep them. I like to keep them, but I know they're a liability issue if us to keep these records on file.
Well, the design review folders,
Yeah.
though, or folders, those files could be, those are going
Yeah.
to be in the system. So you'd have to know which one,
Right.
which model you have under which builder, and then we could find it. But if there were any modifications made to that, we may or may not have the building plans for that home. Does that help?
And I think just to add to that, I think with SmartGov now being in place, finding information is a lot better than what we had back in the day of the paper process or paper filing of, well, that planner just put that stuff over there and we just chucked it over there and then hopefully we could find it. But finding the information the past 3 or 4 years has been a lot better to get that information.
Thank you. That pretty much answers my question. This is a great presentation. Thanks for putting this together.
Okay. And then the last thing is just after this is done, it's master standard plans, building plans. This is where separate, the previous one was more planning related. We're looking at architectural design administratively. After this is done, they take that same approval concept and submit those same drawings to building safety where they go ahead and see, again, 100% drawings for construction to how to build those homes. So now we standardize the process, we standard that plan, and it's ready to be built. And then lastly, after that, that little purple box in the end is that plot plan submittal where they could get it within a matter of 20 minutes.
As you can see, there are a ton of, there's the process within, if you look at the bar and you see those colors, and as Rudy had mentioned, that each one of those different colors is a different application. So that means a different process, but the processes themselves internally are fairly similar. So you're going to see a lot of the same steps from pre-plat to final plat. You're going to see the same steps. You're going to see a pre-application, you're going to see an internal meeting, then we're going to have an external meeting, then we're going to have the full review and resubmit. And then once that's at a point where everybody's comfortable, it moves forward to the next step. So you're going to see that across those applications for the most part. Then when we get into, we'd like to come back and bring the commercial process before you guys as well. And you're going to see a lot of, it's going to be very similar, but there's going to be extra steps there that aren't part of the residential process. So as you look at it, I think focus less on each one of those little individual process steps other than, to understand what each one of those is to some extent. But think about the applications themselves, because as you look at 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 different applications, cradle to grave, and that's when you have to do a rezone of some sort if it's PAD, to the point when you've got your building permit and you're ready to build. So, and then there's more process beyond that. What about inspections? What about, code enforcement has its own process. So there is a lot of similarities, and just want to make sure that you guys understand the basics of it, because obviously we could have talked for another 2 hours and you'd be, number one, asleep, and number two, you'd be confused, and we didn't want to do that. So we didn't want to overwhelm everybody, but we enjoyed the feedback, so we know what to bring back to you.
Yes, Councilmember Wood.
Just real quick, I haven't been involved with any of the residential developers, the builders, but I heard a lot of comments from commercial folks about our processes, and they have some rave reviews for the department, so I just wanted to pass it on. Just looking at this, I can imagine looking at a commercial schematic is going to be even, a schematic, I'm dating myself, could be even more intense, but thank you very much. It's nice to have those comments when we go out there.
Thank you, and I want to give all the credit to Rudy. Rudy did all the groundwork on this. We all kind of pitched in on it a little bit, but Rudy did 90% of it. So in Rudy's spare time over the last year or more, he has been able to get these lined out. It was a huge job, and I know when I tasked him with it, that probably he was swearing under his breath at me, but he didn't do it in front of me, so we're good, and he's done a great job on it.
But it's a much needed to understand where we're at, and I think with Smart Gov now in place, we can now understand how to better enhance our system as a city itself. So I think it was much needed to be done anyway, so.
I have a comment on that, but I'm going to go to Vice Mayor here.
Yeah. Again, thank you. This is very good. I guess the only critique I would offer is when we get to the commercial, there seems to be some kind of disconnect. I too have heard a lot of praise from the developers that are used to doing big projects, but where I'm seeing some of the pushback and some of the confusion lie is with the one-time smaller development stuff. So maybe take a little bit of, either add a couple extra steps or maybe a couple extra bits of information, because this is the kind of questions we get. How come my project is being held up? And I think that's important to know, because the guys that do this for a living are different from the one-times. So, but this was very good. Thank you.
Thank you. Last comment, I do have this PDF version. It's a draft format. It's not ready to be, it's technically public, but it's still a draft format. If you guys are, be more than welcome to send the full version of this flow chart to you, so you could look and may critique it or understand what can be done better, or just let me know any feedback on it.
Yeah, and that's where my comment lies, is that as we get through kind of a final revision of this, and this is the start, this is the draft, I think this is great. And as we go through the commercial presentation as well, I think that's very helpful. But I think the next step is getting this information in this flow chart out there in some format, again, from a PDF, but on our website, produced to folks. If something on the website, I know as we're talking about revamping that as we move forward, but something that's right there on that home screen says, if you're looking to build in the city of Maricopa, here's our process,
right,
in colorful bubble letters so you can see it. It kind of spreads the gap, right? Because the person, again, just like the comment made earlier, the person that comes in and is building a Walmart has a whole professional team that knows how to do this, and they've done this across the nation, and they know there's little differences, but they also know there's a lot of similarities. For somebody that's a mom and pop that has never done it before, this might be an eye-opening experience to say, wow, I probably ought to, pay attention to this before I walk into that first meeting and get overwhelmed. This will give me some place to start. I don't want to discourage anybody, but at the same time, it allows them to see and understand this is what's ahead of you. Make your decision wisely. You can even, relate in people as they buy properties, for goals and ideas of things. Again, it's not to discourage, but rather to say, help me navigate this process, and what am I getting myself into? So I think having this at their fingertips so that they do say, my project's being, dealt with unjustly. It'll be nice to say, well, this was laid out in the beginning. We gave this to you in our pre-meeting. Right. You got to see it on the website. It's posted everywhere. I think the more information we can get out there, the better. So
Definitely.
awesome.
Thank you.
All right, well, we've run over time, so let's go ahead and move this meeting to a close. Thank you very much, Development Services. We appreciate this. Rudy, Kazi, especially Martin, for doing this. This is very helpful. We appreciate it. let's go ahead, and with that, council, we are a little over. Obviously, we won't be moving to E-session at this point, so can I have a motion to close this meeting? We will stand in adjournment for about 5 minutes, and then we will come back and start our next meeting, okay? With that, can I have a motion to adjourn, please? Is there a second? Motion and second. Any further discussion? All in favor, say aye. Aye. We stand adjourned for 5 minutes.